Two.
Yeah, Excel the algebra. I did this here.
Oh, oh, yeah, okay. You teach at that time or you just get?
No, I just I'm this every day as well.
Yeah.
Around
Makes
this
sense.
on the kid, send the kids.
Oh, yeah, okay. But it works out.
Parking lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When is your semi-marathon again? Donc,
It's just a vacation
aujourd'hui, nous recevons le docteur Théophile Bougna, qui est économiste et qui travaille avec les se retrouve avec nous comme ici. Please, we are about to start the seminar. And all the noise that we are making now is being recorded and
Live streaming.
everybody is on YouTube is already aware of what we are doing now. So
And our kids are watching. Huh?
I would like to invite everybody to listen now as I introduce our guest of honor today. He is Dr. Bougna Lonla Theophile. His last name is Lonla, just as mine, just without the G. We are from the same village. We went to the same high school. We graduated the same year from high school. He passed a very competitive exam that I did not accept to do. So he went to do statistics, and after his graduation from there, he worked a couple of years back home, and then he migrated to Canada, where he got a PhD and got hired at the World Bank in Maryland. So that's where he works now. And he's here today to talk with us about poverty in transport modeling. And on Friday, he will be having another talk for the students AMS chapter at 11 a.m. So please feel free, you have.
Thank you so much, Marshall. Thank you guys for connecting online, and thank you for taking the time and taking your opportunity, because it's super high, right? Instead of being either doing your research or your courses, you're here to listen to my little talk about poverty and transport modeling. So Marshall said it all. So we are brothers, same village. We went from the same school, and he forgot to mention that he was the best of all among us. Anytime we had a complicated mathematical problem or physics, Lonla was the go-to. So I'm glad that we've managed to materialize this. So today I'm going to briefly discuss like case study. It's going to be a little different from what you are used to. So there's no equation in my presentation, even though behind the scene there are a lot of equation and modeling that are going on, but I'm just trying to make it simple and light so that we can have a discussion. So as you know, data are very important, especially when it comes to policy. I work in an institution where that's what we do every day. So every day we have requests coming from either the management or the government. We want to understand difficult questions. We need to use robust and solid evidence to actually provide solutions to this problem. And usually we don't have the resources. We need to believe in something. I want to disclose that everything I'm going to say here is my opinion. It's not the one from the World Bank. So data is especially important when it comes to modeling poverty, transport, education, health, and recently there's a trending topic about climate change. So we need to understand how we can do better as a world to preserve our globe. So traditional approach to measure or tackle poverty, transport, or any topic has been to go to household and collect data. Sometimes it's costly. Sometimes they are annoyed to see us coming every year asking typically the very same questions. So what we are thinking here is, especially in data scarce environment like conflict affected region or middle or poor countries, we don't have money to actually collect data every year. So what are the other sorts of data that we can use to tackle the very same type of question that a normal survey will have allowed us to do? So the good news is technology revolution. So we now have access to many big data that are sometimes freely available. We do have improvement in modeling, machine learning, artificial intelligence. So how can we use those ingredient actually to complement the existing data and help solve different and difficult questions that policymakers are having. So today I'm gonna briefly discuss 4 cases. One will be about how to model poverty using satellite imagery. So how can we measure poverty from the skies, especially in the context of Sudan, where since 2009 they haven't had their census. We know nothing about what is going on. So how can we use satellite imagery to try to inform the government about what is the population, what is the density, and what is the state of poverty in the country? The second example is how we can use mobile data to model mobility, right? So with COVID and also with the existence of telecommunication company, there's a lot of free data that are available. If we don't have money to conduct a survey, can we use cell phone information on people movement day to day to actually model their travel behavior and inform policymakers? The second aspect is really related to my research. So I do impact evaluation at the bank, and I'm going to use 2 cases. One is in Iraq, where I started the project in 2017. It was not possible to travel there, but the government was keen to understand what is the value for money. They have been putting money in 2 corridors, one in the south, and they have been building a new corridor in the north to connect to the Turkish border. They want to know if there's a value for money. They want to know if there are benefits associated to that. I cannot go there. I cannot design a customized survey. I had to rely on satellite imagery actually to evaluate those 2 corridors. The second one is the Morocco example, where over the last 20 years, the country have been investing in many highways. And then at some point, the Minister of Finance stopped and said, hey, I want to understand what are the benefits, the wider benefit of those corridors. Is it worth putting our money on transport investment? And the last example is actually something I'm currently working on. It's a project that is, if everything goes well, it's supposed to be approved in Cameroon. It's actually in Amadou region. So there's a road that spans around 200 kilometers, but you have to do it in 12 hours, sometimes 8 in dry season. So in the rainy season, the condition are worse. Why? Because there are many flooding episodes there. So what we are trying to do is to help the government understand in those 205 kilometers, what are the sections that are vulnerable to climate change, and how can we embed it, climate resilient feature in the design of the road so that when rain comes, it actually cannot deteriorate the quality of the infrastructure. So today I'm going to show you how, using remote sensing data, we were able to identify the 45 kilometers that are the most vulnerable in the next 20 and 50 years to flooding. Poverty, as we know, we can measure subjectively, objectively. So if you look at the international poverty line, where we define a poor person as someone who is not spending more than $2 per day using PPP values. So in the case of Sudan, if you use that, you will find out that only 15% of the population are poor. But if you think about how, if Sudan move into the lower middle income sort of country level, is gonna, they will need at least $3 per day to be actually defined as non-poor. So there we shift from 15 to 40%. And if tomorrow in 30 years, the country become an upper middle income country, it means the expectation is that everyone should at least spend $5 per day. And currently there's less than 20% of the population that are living with that $5. So it's important to measure. Why? Because it's important for policy, and it's also important to have it right when it comes to measuring poverty. What is poverty? It could be defined as lack, scarcity, or deficiency, depending on what you use: food, access to clothes, dwelling, access to education, electricity. Those are the elements usually when you want to measure poverty on a multidimensional way. We consider all those aspects. What is someone who is rich? I picked the picture of Jay-Z and Beyonce, right? If you see them, this is what we would like to be. This is how we would like to be. We want a nice car, we need a driver, we need big house, we need champagne, caviar, all those stuff. It's actually attached to someone who is rich. But how? Sorry? And a beautiful wife, like Beyonce, of course. So how do we measure that, right? So how do we use household or other type of data to actually measure that someone is poor or someone is rich? So in the case of Sudan, like I mentioned, and even like 2 weeks ago, there's still coup in the country. I don't know what is the current situation, but the country is really prone to frequent violence, right? So they don't have data, they don't have the time actually to undertake survey in a fragile and conflict country. What we have decided to do is actually to pair with one university in Canada, University of Sherbrooke. They have a lab, and the idea was actually to use some of the data they managed to acquire through their university to help the government understand how from the sky we can measure poverty and update the population census. So that's what we did in the case of Sudan. So we use building level information from satellite actually to estimate what is the rate of poor, what are the neighborhoods that are more dense in terms of population, and how can we use type of building actually to attribute poverty. So we use high resolution satellite imagery as well as very high resolution. So here, for example, is a picture of a neighborhood in Sudan, the capital city, Khartoum. And this is what from the left side we have from the census. So the idea was really to make sure that using census images, we can actually relate to what is coming from the satellite. So it's always important to put both together so that there are consistencies on how we measure that. In the first step, we use the 2008 census that they have in trying to actually focus on what is visible from the satellite, which is the high or large urban centers. The second step, what we did was actually to select some neighborhoods that we believe are more dense. We have population, we have economic activity, and those can be shown and seen easily from the satellite imagery. So we pick 8 localities, and we define a buffer around those localities, 25 kilometer squares, just to make sure that we can have spatial heterogeneity in our result. In the third step, what we did, we actually buy those satellite imagery, so 2008, in trying to annotate the different buildings. And what is important here is really to make sure that we can train a model and provide information that will allow the model actually to tell us what is in this imagery. So here we were interested on defining the taxonomy of how the buildings are. So we define, for example, a tent. The idea would be to say, if someone lives in a tent in an urban area, it means you don't have access to like a proper accommodation or a proper dwelling. Someone living in a villa in Khartoum is obviously someone who is rich. So we can actually capture that through the satellite imagery. Someone living in a flat apartment may have money to rent or is owning that. We can distinguish between commercial and residential house. The fourth step was really, this is what I call the black box, right? So you use a model that allow you to actually capture the image, look at what is in the census and trying to relate them, right? And here, this is an example of what you can see. So you search the image, and this is really for every 40 centimeters in the city of Khartoum, you have an image and you can zoom in and look for what is a tent, what is a villa, what is the dwelling, what are the different types. And this is coming through coding. So you do a lot of coding exercise, asking the computer to detect the image that you are looking for based on what you have seen on the ground. So there's really connection between the ground and the sky to make sure that it can match and give us the information we need. Please feel free to stop me if I'm saying something that is not clear for you, and also happy to clarify. So in step 5, what we do, we actually applying a method actually to move from 2008 to 2020 to make sure that we can have what we are looking for. So in the left side here, if you zoom in, you can actually see what is the representation of what you have been seeing at 40 centimeter later, at 40 centimeter pixels. You can actually zoom in and see exactly that this is the corresponding image I'm having. Why this is important is because it will have been costly for the government who is fighting against violence and political unrest to actually undertake another round of survey. But with this method and with this satellite imagery, we were able actually to help them not only update the population census, but also classify within different neighborhoods in Khartoum, which neighborhood can be actually tagged as a poor, or which neighborhood can be tagged as a rich neighborhood based on the quality of the dwellings.
Is there Google Map imaging?
Yeah, those Google Map is an option, but usually we use private satellite imagery, especially when it comes to high resolution. Google Map is not that high in terms of resolution. Yeah, so why is it important and why does it matter? Because it can be a very nice substitute to the census. We can use it to complement traditional survey. Like I mentioned, we use the 2008 census and use our satellite imagery, and then we just project that to 2022. It's also an ideal solution in context where there are conflict and violence. You cannot travel there, so you need to rely on the skies image actually to do your research. It's also very important to identify settlement, especially in the case of Sudan, where with the satellite imagery, we were able to distinguish within settlements what are the different categories of dwelling we are seeing there. It's also allowed to classify neighborhoods in terms of slums, poor and richer neighborhood. It's also very important for special targeting, right? So if the government, for example, in the case of Sudan, want to implement like a poverty reduction program, with this type of data, they know exactly where to go, right? They're not going to go where there are villas. They're going to go in slum because this is where they expect to see more poor people. And it's also important given the spatial granularity. So we are talking about 400 centimeters. So if you think about it, it's like within a city of 25 kilometers, you can only have for each 40 centimeters, you can zoom in and try to understand the dynamic within that small spatial range. And it's also very cost effective. So we managed to deliver this with the, in a budget of less than 50K compared to a census, which sometimes like 300 million or 200 million.
Are there some places that are known for having very good census data that you could compare to?
Exactly. So there are some middle-income countries in Africa. If you think about South Africa, for example, where they are doing this regularly, so they don't need satellite imagery because they have a system in place. They have a very strong statistical office that are collecting data on a regular basis.
So you could compare your data with their census data.
Yeah, we can run the model because I didn't go through the detail, but usually you train the model and you test with other type of data just to make sure the prediction is actually accurate. Yeah. And usually we are within the range of 90 to 95% accuracy rate.
These sensors of survey.
Sensor.
It's a sensor.
Yeah.
You want to complete the survey.
We have the complete census, and then now we are using satellite imagery to actually extrapolate because we didn't have the last round of the census. Yeah. So second case, transport modeling. So here I'm gonna take an example on how we can use mobile data. So technically, I don't know, T-Mobile, AT&T, they know exactly your routine. They have information when you wake up, when you start using your phone, where you go, university, grocery, so they can actually track you on day-to-day basis. They have those information stored somewhere, but nobody is using it unless there's a request from the government. So the idea here was, we don't have money to actually go to household and ask questions. Can we use those information to define mobility pattern within a city? Can we use those information to track how people move within cities and what are the places that they usually go and what are the type of activities they're actually undertaking on day-to-day basis. So for almost 50 years within the transport group, what we have been doing is actually collecting data on people, on road users. And it's sometimes, like I mentioned, it's expensive. There are sampling error because you're not sure whether the area you're targeting is actually statistically enough actually to explain what you're looking for. Sometimes it is lengthy. Time is money. People are stressed about their life. They don't want another person to come and collect the information that they disclosed a year or 6 months before. And also there's a lot of extensive cleaning process. So it's been very difficult, like I say, and I believe, and we believe in the transport group that using new source of technology can actually allow us to improve in the way we are actually modeling transportation. So there are a wide range of information that we can use, smart card, where you know what is the income of the person, how much is putting on weekly or day-to-day basis. You can track how much is put on transport or spend on transportation within a week. You can use GPS navigation to see how people use it and how they travel. And you can also use information from just Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. So here I'm going to focus mostly on mobile phone data, but the application are pretty similar if you want to use other sources of data. So this is an example in Chile, Santiago. It's a big city. So here, what we did is actually we use household survey data to compare with what the mobile network data can give us. So as you can see, in blue, it's like there's no trip, but when it's red, it means we have the maximum trip. So from the census in the middle, we can see the red. So the model, I mean, the smart card or the mobile data was actually able to track the same movement or the same, with accuracy, actually the same trip that were actually demonstrated through the survey. So it's reliable, it is effective, and without, instead of spending money to collect higher enumerator, higher SRF, we can actually save that money and have a contract with the mobile operator to use those data that are sitting in their silos. So we can use that to track mobility pattern and see how people are actually moving in cities. So yes.
I can see the pattern kind of similar.
Yeah.
The colors are different, the heat map.
I think there's a resolution problem because I just copied from a document, right? So what you can see here is from the houses, right? So you can see those big.
Yeah.
Using mobile data, you're actually able to see the same thing, not as red as here, but at least using mobile from that, and you can see that you have this number of things, maximum number of things, exactly at this moment. So it's kind of a matrix where you put all the shit in Santiago Chile at the time, and you see when you have peak and how you have like zero movement. Again, yes, please.
Aren't we assuming that everybody has an answer?
That's a very good question, right?
But the poors might not.
Oh.
So we will not be able to accommodate in this.
Definitely. So that's a good point, right? So it's about the bias, right? By using this, given that not all population can afford having a cell phone, so they're working, and that's actually true in Africa. That's why I pick Latin America, Santiago, where it's a big urban city, cell phone penetration is like around 90%, right? But if I go to, I don't know, Yaoundé or Bougna, where Martin and I grew up, people just walk. They don't use mobile phones. So if you go there and try to use this data, it's not accurate because you're not going to have the reality. So we do this in big cities where we expect that people are educated, they have access to cell phone, and we can actually track their mobility pattern with those.
It was for all the other cards and stuff.
Exactly, yeah. So yeah, that's another, I mean, I think I have a slide on limitation, right? So that's why this is a complement, not a substitute, especially in case where we do have very low level of cell phone penetration. Yeah, so we need to rely also on data to make sure our model are actually accurate, because if you model transport in a city where people with mobile data in a city where only 20% are using, of course, the result will not be actually reflecting the reality of that city. So we need to bear that in mind while using those type of data. But at least, like I mentioned, the trip matrix can actually improve the way we actually model because of the spatial, fine spatial granularity of the data compared to surveys. And I think it's also provide an opportunity actually to see travel patterns in actually a rich possible way that using normal survey we were not able to do before. It's also very important actually when you come to what if the policy, I mean, what if the government change a policy? What if the government increase the rate or the rate for this smart card? What will be the impact? How many people will actually not be able to continue ride on the public transit if there's an increase? Using the cell phone data, you can actually see who is actually start working or who is stopping a pattern that has been actually displayed over like 10 or 15 years. So in terms of future, I think, as we all know, climate change, there's this e-mobility trend that is coming. So I think it's important that with those new devices, especially electric vehicle, we can actually embed an element that will allow us not only to collect the same type of data, but also to predict the future, making sure that we have the tools or the model that will allow us to predict at what pace actually the decarbonization or the e-transition will happen in especially big cities, New York, LA, Washington, DC. I think those are the places where we are trying to push people to the public transit, but for that, you need to understand what are the mobility patterns. For example, starting July 5 in DC, public bus will be free for everyone. Why? Because we want to encourage people to take it, and we hope that it will have an impact. Not we, the mayor, hope that with that policy, it can actually help reduce the GHG in Washington DC. So limitation, I think we discussed that. I'm gonna quickly skip that. But again, because the smart card sometimes or the mobile data don't have the exact start date, that's why we need you guys. We need academia to help us determine or establish a probabilistic model that will allow to using like big data, because we have a lot of data. It's easy actually to converge or to define probabilistic model that will allow us to actually complete the data or predict the future. So that's why depending on how and what is your research, it's important to also think about application. And while thinking about application, think about those type of difficult challenges, like how do you model mobility? How do you model poverty using those kind of freely available data? So, I mean, I've listed what I believe could be promising research avenue. The first one is actually optimizing the combination of the two, right? Do we have a model that can actually run with both type of data? So she took a good example of, we have a country, in some part of the country, we have population that don't have access to that. How can we combine customized survey into places or into remote places with satellite imagery or mobile data in urban area where we do have people accessing that? How can we design a model that will actually encompass both remote sensing and survey data? How can we model the travel demand, especially for those that are working? Why are they working? Is it because they are constrained by the cost of the public transport? Can we model that and inform the policy about what is the ceiling, what is the optimal level of the pricing for the public transport that we need to fix to allow those people that are working actually to use public transportation? People that are using car, can we tax more so that they can use public transport? Is there any subsidy that we can actually add into the public transit company to make sure that their mode of operation is more efficient? Because usually people don't like public transit because of the traffic and also the fact that they are not efficient. You don't have a bus at any 5 minutes, it takes time. So how can we optimize the way we design our transport policies so that we can actually help the government to solve the challenge that the people are facing? So now I'm going to shift to my work. So impact evaluation, what is it? It's like a counterfactual analysis where you ask what would have happened if this was not implemented. You have a policy and you want to see how people will react. So I'm going to pick two cases here, one in Iraq and another one in Morocco. So I already gave the background for Iraq. So now we can see the two roads. So yeah, I think I merged them. Yeah, but from the left side here, we have this small road. It's Asian and Somalia. I don't know if someone is familiar with Iraq. So this is actually a road connecting to the Turkish border. So they drew somewhere here, and the government decided to open because that road was not, it was still passable, but in very poor conditions. So they decided to build a highway here to connect to Iraq. And here in the south, what the government is doing is just improving the quality. This is all. This is a road that should be to Kuwait, I think. Yeah, right. And, these are in between, right? So that's mean with climate, the bitumen is actually prone to climate. So what they're doing here is for improvement to make sure. I have to be closer to the back. Sorry.
If you show on yours.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It would be helpful, but
Oh yeah,
well,
can you see
because
first?
they are not seeing what you show.
Okay.
If you bring
Yeah, sorry about
Yeah,
that.
Theo,
yeah,
sorry.
if you bring your
Theo,
mouse,
please.
you'll be able to see.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Okay, so I have two graphs. One on my left side is an orange graph. This is a corridor in the northern Iraq, right? The road is called Gishin and Suhaina. And from the left side, I have another corridor, actually two, R7 and R8, that are going down the south of Iraq, connecting Iraq to Kuwait. And there is just road improvement. So we have a new corridor that's built by the government. The corridor, I think, opened in January 2020, just before COVID. And we have a corridor that already exists. So rehabilitation plus new construction. And the construction was actually in a greenfield area. So there were nothing there. It was just tree, and they opened the door to Turkish. So what I did, again, the request came in 2017 when I joined the bank in 2016. So 1 year, and then my manager called me and said, oh, we have this project and we don't know how to go about it, right? So the government want to understand what is the benefits of this and what can we do? So I thought about, okay, since we cannot travel, can we use satellite imagery? So what we did here is to have free, and those satellite imagery are free. It's actually the VRIS from the NASA, I think, or the Oceanographic Association in the US. It's actually free. You can have access to that. The resolution is not high, it's 7 meters. So for every 700 meters, you have a light, like a value of the intensity of light at a particular position in that. So what we did, we created a buffer around the two roads, try to understand how the luminosity have changed before and after the government opened this corridor. The idea would be to use a kind of an event study model to determine whether with the new opening, we're going to see more light coming from human activities. We also use the NDVI data. It's also a remote sensing that gives you an idea of what is the vegetation in the area, because it was a greenfield area. I wanted.
How
Yes.
would the new light be?
The new light,
Yeah, like,
and it is taken as given, right? So I'm just, the satellite actually pass across the road every minute, actually, sometimes second. So what I'm doing is I'm collecting, and the information I'm having is on monthly basis. So every month I have a stock of light in that particular area. I think it started in 2012, since the corridor opened in 2020. My idea was actually to do a study event and see, since the opening, do I see the same stock of light as before, right? If there's any change after 20, that change should be attributed to the fact that there's a new road that is open in a greenfield area. Of course, there might be light or something, so that's why we control by adding place fixed effect. We're also adding element like the NDVI just to capture all elements that are not related to the light. The idea is really to see what has changed since the opening of that corridor. And in the south, it's more complicated because it's an existing corridor. So what we're going to do there is just run a correlation exercise just to see, since the road have been improved, this is how we have seen in terms of change, pattern change in the intensity of light around there. I think I'm going to show some regression result at the end. So then for the south, because it was important for us to actually create an index that will track how many road improvement happened in that particular road between 2016 and 2022. So this is a 5-year project. So the government is there. There's a contractor there every day. They are doing either adding light, either widening, either blocking the road. I mean, there's a lot of things going on, and we managed actually to create an index that would allow us to capture the number of improvement per month. It was not actually an easy task, because my area, I remember, spent a lot of time trying to understand the engineering report and how we can actually attribute the different type of improvement to actually something that can impact the intensity of light or the traffic along the corridor. So I have started imagery. So I think it's coming back to a question. So is it something that is meaningful? Is it something that relates to real life, the outcome or the? So here I ran a sample correlation exercise with the population and the income in Iraq. So for the same district, I was able actually to look at whether nighttime light is actually correlated with the population. And what I can see is actually is positively correlated. So we have an L square of around 0.7. So what we are measuring from the sky is actually related to real life data like population, or I think the next slide is about income. So I'm using household survey to track the income of the district around my corridor. And I'm trying to correlate that with the intensity of light. And what I can see is also a positive correlation. So everything equal, so I can actually use my nighttime line as a proxy for my population, and for my revenue. And there's a lot of paper out there in economics that are actually showing that. We have this seminal paper. Yeah.
It's kind of weak, right?
It is weak, but still positive, right? The trend is still up there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the key value, you keep how many digits?
Well,
Just the previous slide.
Yeah.
yeah. No, absolutely. But
Maybe
again,
it's not very strong, very strong.
yeah, the first one was good, right? I confess.
Very, very
60.
The first one was excellent. But yeah, look, because it's population and we have population at a very fine level, right? Village. But here it is income, and you know how household survey are. So there's a huge sample bias, right? So you come in the village, you just pick 10 people.
Yeah.
And what we did is actually we picked those 10 people, we have their reported revenue, and we have the intensity of life, and this is what we are correlating. So that's why it's not super strong here, but at least it gives us a sense that you can actually correlate nighttime light with the reported income, right? People say they are earning this, and you actually correlate that with the intensity of light in the area where they live. Okay.
I think the definition of your imaging, like the 700 liter you mentioned.
Exactly.
Impact this.
Definitely, yeah. The level aggregation matter, right? Because here village is could be like 2 or 3 kilometers, and I have 10 observations if you think about it. But for my light, for every 700 meters, I have a value that I aggregate up to the 1 or 2 kilometers before running the correlation exercise. Sounds good? Okay. So the exercise is really, so on the left side, I have my new corridor. So what I did, I created like a buffer around that road, 5, 10, and 20, because I want to see if places that are closer to the highway will actually have more light compared to places that are a little bit farther away. So it's spatial heterogeneity impact. And I'm transforming, like I said, my 750 meters between 2012 and 2020 to have my pre-opening information. And then since 2020, all what I will see is actually the changes since the opening of the corridor. So on the left side, you have the images right before the opening, and then in 2020, you can see. So it is not, it's difficult to see the change, but when you look at the value, it's actually 16 or 20% change in terms of the value if you aggregate around the 25 kilometers per hour, right? And what I did here is like a market access where I'm using population to compute what's the shorter distance between the different districts that I need. And the more the light, the more the population can actually travel at a good speed because of the improvement in the road. So then what I'm actually wrapping up now is I'm using mobility data too. So I use GPS mobility data to see what is the pattern of the traffic around the new corridor. So there's a previous route. The idea would be it was mountainous. How can we compare since the opening? What is the deviated traffic that is actually going through the new corridor, and how places that were before connected through the old road are actually losing in terms of satellite imaging. So what I can see here is actually show here is I have the number of unique users, right, using the traffic data actually to measure also congestion, like congestion close to the corridor and congestion in the old road. So it's a bit noisy. Why? Because the road just opened. You don't see that much difference between the old and the new road. The new road is in red. It's a bit flat because we don't have that many observation. It's only 2 years compared to the old road where people have their habit. So they're not changing. So it's going to take time actually for the new road to attract the old road traffic. And then regression, right? We all love regression. So what I did for every month is just like a panel regression where for each unit observation, 750 meters, I can just run and add some control with the fixed effect for the location and the time. So what we can see is that in 2020, since the opening, it shifts from negative to positive because it was a greenfield area. If anything, there were actually a negative correlation between nighttime light and the opening of the corridor. But since the opening in 2020, we have seen a positive change, and the change is actually more pronounced within a 10-kilometer buffer, right? If you go above 10, you actually will be in Turkey. So I think this was very good because the government was happy to see this result, meaning there are changes that are happening since the opening of the corridor. And they expect to see more change, both in terms of traffic, but also in terms of human activity around the corridor. The second case is Morocco. Like I said, I had 2 months actually to deliver on this. So I was just sitting in my desk and then I received a phone call. We have a problem. The government is asking this and we don't know how to do it. It was in March and it has to be delivered by May. So I had 2 months to do something. Luckily, I was already working in Iraq and I have all my code, all the framework was easy. So it was just to me like a replication exercise. It was also a cross-validation of what I'm doing in Iraq because I have an existing case. I have some data I can compare and see how it works. So the 2 corridors are actually the El Dajij and Safi. For everyone who know Morocco, I've never been in, no, I was in Marrakesh, but not in the area of the corridor. And also Kuriba and Beni Mellal. Those are actually 2 big projects in the country because they're creating a new port area in Tanger. And the idea was actually how can we develop the south of Morocco, right? And those 2 roads were actually meant to actually unleash the potential of the southern part of Morocco. And the government was keen on understanding whether there are change, there are some visible change, and how can we measure that? That's how I came in with this approach, looking at for the 2 corridors, before and after the opening, what is happening in terms of nighttime light. Nighttime light here is my proxy for the economic activity. The more I see the light, the more I'm happy because I'm assuming people are actually functioning, right? We do have industry, we do have activities, and we do have human activities. So I create a 10-kilometer buffer around the 2 corridors, and I look at the increase, right? So technically, between 2013 and 2020, there have been 20% more lights in Kuriba and the Beni Mellal, okay? And my goal is really to tell them how and what percentage of this 25 is actually due to the opening of that corridor. We do have light. It's true that even without the road, there could have been an improvement, right? Because population are actually anticipating and doing things, right? But the question is, how much of this 25% can be attributed to the opening of that corridor? Same with the other corridor between El Dajij and Safi. The average increase was 38%, but how much of this can be attributed to the investment the government made? That was my goal. And I run a simple panel framework, simple per se, but it's not simple, with fixed effect. And what I find is actually around, okay, let me read here. So around 18% for the Kuriga and Beni Mellal. So since the opening, there have been an increase of almost 20%, right? Depending on the specification. Same with the Adjija Safi, it's around 20% increase. So this to me was a life saving for the boss of the region because it was the MENA region. And it was also life saving for the country director of the bank in the country because he needed to have that dialogue with the Minister of Finance and showcase this is what we did and this is what we can tell you about your investment in this 2 corridor in Morocco. So it's what I call geospatial impact evaluation approach. It's very simple to implement because it relies on freely available data. You can go down to very high resolution if you have money to acquire satellite imagery that are not freely available. So instead of using a 750 meters resolution, you can actually use a 40-meter resolution, but those data are not free, right? But it will give you a better flavor in terms of the quality, also the precision of the estimate. It is rigorous because we are using statistical model. It is quick because the code are already there. It's more about just running and making sure that the matrix is there. And it's also effective because it can allow you to respond to very quick and pressing demands. There's also potential for replication. So I've done this in Iraq, Morocco, I'm doing that in Cameroon. So there's scope actually to do that in many countries to actually validate the external validity of the method. I will conclude with, actually I'm on the time, I'm surprised. I thought I would actually not reach to this bad. So climate change. There's no need to actually sell the importance of climate today, right? We are all prone and vulnerable to it. We can see that in our cities, in our day-to-day lives. But here, we're talking about a region in Cameroon that is really, really vulnerable to climate. It's the far north of Cameroon. It's supposed to be a dry area. It's not raining more than a month or 2 months, but anytime there's a rain, it's just a complicated rain. This guy here can tell you exactly because he was born there. So it's complicated. So this is the road network. Sorry to say, but in Cameroon, we don't have more than 1% of road in good condition, right? So most of our roads are in very bad condition, 96%. And when it comes to national road or paved roads, I'm not talking. So this is the map of the far north in Cameroon. And here we are talking about a region, if for people that are familiar with Boko Haram, so the region have been actually suffering for Boko Haram, the far north of Cameroon. So since 16, I think, right? Since 2016 or 14, yeah, there have been a lot of problem in that region. So population were displaced to other area. They all came to Mara because inside was just crazy and chaos. So what we have is we have data actually that are crowdsourcing data. Every time there's an unrest or there's a shooting, people are just reporting in the UNHCR or the International Organization of Migration are recording that. So we have very precise information about climate violence and armed conflict in the area. So we mapped that around our corridors. And the next thing we did was actually to try to understand what within a 30-kilometer buffer of that road, what are the areas that are prone to climate change, and how can we help the government understand how they can better design the new roads so that it is resilient to climate change. So we define excess flooding using 2 thresholds. Anytime there's a raining, anytime it's rain of up to 10 or 20 centimeters, we expect to see flooding. Anytime there's a rain of 50 centimeters, we expect to see flooding, and we are using 10, 50, and 100 years. So for the 2 threshold, 20 centimeters and 50 centimeters, we can actually see what is the length of the road that is actually vulnerable to climate change. So if you consider a 10-year trade, we have like only 4% of the road that is prone or vulnerable to climate. But if you go down to 100 years, actually 30% of the corridor will be actually vulnerable to climate change if nothing is done. Here, yes, it's just the map of the different area, and actually disaggregated also because in the project area, we have 2 districts, like the Logan and Shari and the Mayosaba, where we have Mora. And the Logan and Shari is actually around Kusiri, which is the last city before Chad, actually. And there we do have the Lac Chad, which is also a lake that is also in threat in terms of climate change. So it's very important actually to make sure that we preserve that lake. There have been a lot of challenges. Just an anecdotal story in my project, I had to actually explain and convince the governor of the bank that because we are going to do some drilling activities, we are not actually going to put pressure on the Lake Chad. We have to provide evidence that our project will not actually undermine the current status of the Lake Chad and create tension between Cameroon, Chad, and Nigeria, because those are the countries, including Niger also, we share the Lake Chad. So overall, what we found out in our analysis is that around 45 kilometers out of the 200 kilometers are prone to climate change. We sent a consultant on the ground who actually went and not only confirmed this, but actually found that it was pretty much close to our numbers. So they went there and they looked kilometer by kilometer, and they come up with around 60 kilometers. So if you think about it, I was just sitting in my office using satellite imagery, and I was able to identify that 22% of the corridor will be vulnerable to climate change. And we have technical people who went on the ground, look at the corridor, walk through the corridor, kilometers by kilometer, and they come up with a result that is pretty much the same. So that's one of the beauty of using freely available data to actually inform policy. So yeah, this is just something to show like what is the correlation of flooding and school closure, right? So I have information on school when they are closed or when they're open. I was able actually to show that whenever there's a flooding event, kids are actually missing class, they are missing school. So we really need to fix the road to make sure that there's no disruption on their education attainment. Yeah, I think this is the end. I have zero side of conclusion because I was not expecting to finish on time, but I'm glad that I finished on time. So if there's one thing we should actually keep from my seminar is that we do have a lot of freely available data out there. We do have a lot of challenge from the policymaker side. I'm working in a policy institution. So there are a huge demand, and we do need academia actually to use those data and help us solve the different challenges we're having. I just picked poverty, transport, and climate, but there are many challenges in every single area that you can imagine. Health, education, I don't know, trade, with COVID, the global supply chain was disrupted. We needed information in real time. What can we do and what type of model can we use to provide those solutions and information to the government to actually effectively address the question. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm happy to provide answer or clarification if needed. Thank you.
And so, are there any questions, starting by my own? You mean to tell me that when you guys go to all these countries with all these projects, you're actually working with the governments of those countries?
Yeah.
To try to prevent projects, which also would imply that actually the Cameroon government is trying to solve the problems that we have with the roads.
Yep. That's true.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Everybody out there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can pick this road. This is the third time we are trying to fix this road. The first time we have a Chinese company, but because of Boko Haram, they were kidnapped and 2 were killed. So we had to stop. The government was already, the contract was signed, the company was working, but because of that breach of contract, they just left. So the government has to come back again and say, hey, we need to rehabilitate this. So we had another project, but that project was a regional project with Chad. We were trying to connect Douala and N'Djamena. So we say, okay, because Douala and N'Djamena, you have to go through that road. Let's actually include that road there. Again, we decided, okay, because those Chinese company contractor were kidnapped, let's use the army. So the army convinced the bank that they can do it. I'm actually disclosing, but no, I think it's everyone knows that, right? So the army didn't do well. So they have like a civil, we call it military in Cameroon. So so the civil engineer that and the army. So they thought because of that, they actually have the capacity to do the road, but it happened that they don't have the capacity to do that kind of complicated road. So that was the second fail. But now we are trying for the third time. Why we believe it's going to be a success? Because we have learned a lot of lessons. So we have learned a lot of lessons from here, and we're actually improving the road between Babaju and Bamenda, which is our village, and it's been successful. Why? Because instead of using the army for doing the work, we are using the army for security. So we have a protocol between the construction firm and the army for them to protect the construction worker, and that we believe will be applied in the Mora, Dabanga, and Kuseri, and it will work. I went through the road in last March, and we were escorted by the army. So we went through the whole corridor, and we believe if the same dispositive security is actually implemented, we can actually successfully implement this road. This is a very important road. It's been built back in 1952 by the former president, but since then there have been never rehabilitation there. So and it's very important because it's connecting Cameroon to Nigeria and Chad don't have access to sea. So they rely on our port for all the importation and exportation. So it's very critical to have it right this time around. And we believe all the stars are aligned, and we cross our finger, and by the end of, let's say, 2026, you can actually go from Mara to Kuseri in less than 2 hours. That's the goal.
Is the construction firm?
Yeah, Theo.
No, actually, we opened the bid. It's a competitive bid. Right now, there's a Chadian company, and there's a Tunisian who is doing the mission de control, who is doing the supervision of the work, but the contractor is from Chad, and the government is actually doing the first 5 kilometers. So between Mora and I don't remember the name of the city. So the first 5 kilometers, no, but Dabanga is far. The first 5 kilometers have been done already by the government. So the idea for us is really to leverage on the presence of that company the president of the army and just finance the rest of the corridor. So we have a question online. Huh?
Yeah, Theo.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. I think that the use of IE and new technology help us to solve this type of problem. But my concern is when you have in our urban center, you have too many period of high traffic. At morning between 6 and 9, 6 to from 6 to 9 a.m. when people go to work, and afternoon from 5 to 8 p.m. when people come home. And what do we observe usually in our urban center in these two periods? You have many route user, car, bus, trucks, and the main difficulty are motorbike and pedestrian, and also non-regular vehicle who transport people. How my concern is that how this model, this new technology can help us to solve this type of problem. It's just, I'm thinking after your expose.
Yeah. No, that's a very good question. Huh? And look, congestion is very difficult, right? Even if you go in New York, I think Dr. Alice is connected. New York is one of the crowded city in the world, not only in the US. And how do you model congestion? I think you need data, right? And luckily, we now have access to many different type of data through Waze, for example, through Uber, through cell phone and mobility. I think people, government officials are actually working hard to trying to solve the issue. I think one of the issues when it comes to congestion is really to encourage people to use public transit, right? That's why we have dedicated lane actually for public transportation. In Africa, unfortunately, we don't have that because the roads are not designed in the way that you can have the luxury of blocking a single line for a bus, right? So that's why we still see congestion in Africa, right? So how do we tackle that in Africa? I don't think right now it's a challenge, but not in many cities, right? We only have like few big cities in Africa. Nairobi, for example, is one of those, right? Congestion in Nairobi is just crazy. It's just completely crazy. Addis Ababa too. So you do have big cities where congestion is a concern, but most of the people actually walk. If you go in Yaoundé, Douala in the morning, people are walking. Motorbike, we do have example of country where it is more organized. If you go in Rwanda, for example, if you go in Benin, for example, despite the congestion, they have their dedicated line. And recently I was in Douala, I think they're starting having dedicated line for motorbike. I think that would help a lot in terms of reducing congestion and also reducing traffic and crashes between motorbike and car. So there are solutions that can be implemented, but in terms of data, for example, we don't track data on motorbike. How can we track those? Unless we work with Chinese companies that are designing those motorbikes to install GPS tracker on those motorbikes. This is something that is doable, that will allow us to better understand the different mobility pattern and then trying to address the congestion problems. For example, pick Douala. Douala, how do you solve congestion in Dokoti, right? Not only you need to have more civilized motorbike, but you need the infrastructure, right? The runabout is not well designed. It's just complicated. So from everywhere you have car, motorbike, it's difficult to share. So from the design of the road, we have a problem. From the road user, the way they're actually using the road, we have another problem. So we need a holistic sort of solution to the problem, but having data to understand what are the mobility pattern of people is, I believe, is the first step. We need to understand the travel pattern of people around the Koti. And then once we have that information, we can work with the policymaker and say, look, this is how the runabout is designed. This is how people and what time they're actually traveling around that Carrefour. And this is how, as a researcher, we believe we can solve the congestion in that runabout. So customized solution like this, I think is doable, but we need data information. I don't know if I responded to your question.
I just wanted to actually add to what you
Yeah.
were saying. One of the problems that we face, I think in general, in Africa, is that most of the time people use the cars not because they actually need them, but because for them, the car is a show of
Exactly.
social status, of
Yeah.
the fact that they are above other people.
Yeah.
That is a very serious problem.
Yeah.
You just don't get out of your house, take the car, you can stop traffic because.
It creates unnecessary congestion.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
That's-
creates
that's-
congestion.
Crazy.
Unnecessarily using private.
Yeah.
And,
No, no.
and sometimes even the fact that though it is a private car, you might be someone in the administration who has the right to stop traffic to go alone. So that other people are with.
Not just an session, starting from the president. When the guy is traveling, he stopped everything for like 6 or 4 hours. Can you imagine a city? I mean, some area of the city blocked for 4 hours just because someone has to go to the airport. So this is the kind of situation we are facing. And there's a cool paper that is coming out from Gilles Duranton, it's from Professor at Wharton University, which actually connects the speed within a city with economic development. So the faster people can actually move in a city, the more they are rich and developed, right? So this actually comes to mobility, right? The time we spend is actually productive time we could have used somewhere. And like Marshall mentioned, we don't have this habit of sharing. We don't have carpooling or car sharing in Africa. You have one person in a big car, there's no dedicated lane, so we have many cars on the road. Why using public bus system can actually alleviate the congestion problem. We do have a lot of motorbike. Usually they are informal, they are not civilized, they are not educated on how to share the road with others. That's what creates the chaos in our cities. We have a fancy big question. Dr. Yeah, please.
Yes.
Can you unmute yourself?
Dr. Antonio Francois.
You have to unmute. Should I unmute on?
Your microphone is off, Francois.
It's muted. We can't hear you. Okay, let me ask you to unmute. You have to press the red button in front of
Just
you.
a minute. Okay, that's okay now.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Very much. Thank you very much, Theo, for your presentation. You got me?
It's breaking off. You
Can
can
you hear
actually,
me?
yeah, you can actually remove your video to free some bandwidth. Maybe it will be better.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, much better.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation, Theo. Thank you, Professor Martial, for the invitation. From Cameroon now, I want to ask the following questions. How road light direction can solve the problem of highway in Africa, even because we have road light direction who are maybe not how can I explain to you, not regularly in Africa, because they put the road light where it is not important. I don't understand what I mean. You are modeling study this kind of situation about Africa because it's a very real case in traffic model in Africa now. For example, in Moscow, we had this case, this problem in traffic in Moscow, and they solved them for when we was studied there. There are a big commission from UK who helped Moscow to solve these problems of light road traffic. How can you use to study this kind of for African series, even in Cameroon or in Douala? Thank you very much.
Okay, no, thank you so much. That's a very good question. Unfortunately, I didn't touch upon that, but we have a project in Ethiopia actually. So I have one of my colleagues. What they did is actually on all those runabout where you have traffic light, there are videos. So they actually collect information on those video cameras. So in real time, they can see how people are sharing the road, from the car to the pedestrian, motorbike. So with that information, it's easy, and you have the time also. So it's easy to understand the mobility pattern in that particular roundabout and whether the traffic light is actually appropriate to solve the mobility problem. So I think it is possible. And then one thing is actually from the image, you need actually to code so that you can have like data usable actually to run some model or regression to inform the policy. So that's something that they have been doing for the last 2 years. I haven't checked what is the status, but I think using those kind of information can actually help understand how we can improve the design of the road with appropriate traffic light in places where we do have traffic. And today, I think in the US, as well as I think Europe has started by creating runabout. We realize that stop is not just enough actually to improve safety. So when you create runabout and people know their priority, they are more safer than just having a stop, right? Because someone can just run and if you don't stop, you actually bump into another car. But with the runabout, I think people are more civilized and is reducing the traffic. So to your question, yes, we do have people that are using video actually and image detection actually to create analysis that will allow how we can improve the design of our intersection. And I'm thinking about Addis Ababa, it can be done in Douala, it can be done in Yaoundé. It's more about is the policymaker interested to that. That's why you guys as researchers in Africa, you can actually go and see who owns the traffic light in the city of Douala. What company is actually collecting those information from the camera. You can work with the police and say, hey, I'm a researcher. I have no interest in politics. I just want to help the functioning of the city. I have my student that can actually do image detection and help me understand in the runabout of Dokoti how we can do better. Where can we place the traffic lights so that everyone respects it and the traffic become more fluid? Sounds good?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's good.
Run out of time.
Yeah, Theo, please,
People
just to know, when
here.
you are in
There's a
World
question.
Bank. Yeah, Theo.
Yes, please.
You are hearing me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Theo. Yeah. When you are solving problem in Africa, it is possible that to involve some research team in our university in Africa when you are solving those type of problem. If yes, how can we address we can apply it in order to work with your bank, for example?
That's a good question. The bank do a lot of capacity building activity, and in most of our projects, we usually rely on university. So we are working, for example, with Professor Atswa at Douala. Currently, there's an urban mobility project in Douala. So there's a BRT in preparation in Douala, and I think we didn't use academia for the economic analysis, but I think there's still scope to actually involve them. So how can we apply? I think it depends on the project. It depends also on the project manager, right? So in my project in general, I usually involve academia, and I also build capacity. For example, in the project that I just present in the northern Cameroon, I will translate all the code, all the methodology to the government so that they will use this approach of prioritization in all their road investment in Cameroon. So I talked to the minister already, and I will be coming in Cameroon actually to disseminate the approach that we use for that project. And then academia, of course, they can pick up anytime. For example, I come to Cameroon, I teach at the National Advanced School of Public Work in Yaoundé, and I teach for free. That's how we do it. So they just invite me, I come, I give a 2 or 3 hours or 2 days seminar, discuss with students about topical issue in Cameroon and around the globe. And I can also follow some of their students. So I'm doing that on pro bono basis. So I'm not expected to be paid. I'm just doing it for the sake of dissemination or also giving back to the community. But to come back to your question, I think you have to be alert on what is happening in Cameroon in terms of project. And if you have a project that is actually in your area and you approach the bank office in Yaoundé, because in Douala, we only have like the IFC, the Société Financière Internationale. So it's more about private sector. See, if you work on private sector, just go there and offer your service or check in our website, what are the projects in Cameroon, reach out to the teacher. He will be more than happy to work with you. In Kenya, we have a road safety project and we are working with academia and even a delivery company in Kenya, right? Why? Because we always go online and check who is available and with who we can actually collaborate.
Okay. Thank you. The information.
All right, thank you very much. Is there any other questions? And we had about 41 people for the meeting, so thank you very much. I'm stopping the recording and I meet you